We're going lean, Morgan Wallen announced, not even bothering to sit down. We don't keep dead weight around here. You're done. I stared at the 28-year-old who had been CEO for exactly 6 hours and 43 minutes. The glossy Harvard Business School diploma he'd hung behind his desk still had the price tag dangling from the frame. I see, I replied, my voice steady despite the shock rippling through me. 9 years at Wallen Materials reduced to a 10-second dismissal. May I ask why? Morgan's lips curled into what I assumed was his version of a businessman's smile. My father might have needed someone to hold his hand through every contract, but I have a different vision for this company. We're modernizing. I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the personnel files I'd been reviewing before his assistant summoned me files that contained, ironically, my own carefully negotiated employment agreement. I'll need this in writing, of course, I said, rising from the visitor's chair in what had been Will Wallen's office until his retirement last week. HR will have something for you to sign on the way out, Morgan said dismissively, already turning to his computer. Security will escort you to clear your desk, standard procedure. I gathered my notepad and pen, maintaining the calm demeanor that had served me well through countless negotiations. Of course, thank you for the opportunity to work here. Confusion flickered across Morgan's face at my composure, but he quickly masked it with another practiced smile. Best of luck, Naomi. As the security guard watched me pack my personal items into a cardboard box, my phone buzzed with messages from colleagues who had witnessed my exit from the executive floor. I left them unanswered, focusing instead on the task at hand. In the drawer of my desk was a copy of my employment agreement, the one Will had personally revised 3 years ago when Westlake Supplies had tried to poach me. All set? The guard asked awkwardly. He knew me, of course. Everyone at Wallen knew me as the fixer, the one who solved impossible problems. Almost, I said, sliding the agreement into my bag. Just need to say goodbye to a few people. But I didn't. I walked straight to the elevator, past the shocked faces of my team, and out into the crisp Tulsa morning. In my car, I finally allowed myself a moment to breathe. I opened my bag and pulled out the agreement, flipping to the section I knew by heart the clause Will had insisted on, the one I had negotiated with precision. A smile spread across my face. Morgan Wallen had just made the most expensive mistake of his short career. My introduction to Denison Materials happened 9 years ago when I was 26 and determined to prove myself. Fresh out of law school with a focus on contract law, I had applied to every major company in Tulsa that might need someone to review their agreements. Will Wallen had personally interviewed me, impressed by my attention to detail and willingness to question problematic clauses. Most lawyers just rubber stamp whatever we put in front of them, he had said during our interview. I need someone who will tell me when I'm about to step in it. I was hired the next day. Over the years, I became more than a contract specialist. I was the one Will called when a supplier threatened to pull out, when a major client was unhappy, when the company needed to navigate complex regulatory changes. I rewrote agreements that saved millions, spotted loopholes that would have cost the company dearly, and eventually earned a place at Will's right hand. 3 years ago, Westlake Supplies, Wallen's biggest competitor, tried to lure me away with a salary that made my eyes water. Will countered with not just matching pay, but an employment agreement that reflected how much he valued my contributions. A golden parachute clause, a full year's severance, equity options, and most importantly, a trigger clause that paid out if I was ever terminated without cause. You're family now, Naomi, Will had told me as we signed the agreement. This company wouldn't be what it is without you. I believed him, and for 6 more years, I gave Wallen Materials everything I had. Then Will announced his retirement. We all knew Morgan would take over. Nepotism was alive and well, even in a company that prided itself on meritocracy. What we didn't know was how quickly he would start making changes. In the weeks before Will's last day, I had noticed Morgan watching me during meetings, his expression calculating. When I presented the quarterly compliance report highlighting potential risks the company needed to address, he had dismissed my concerns as excessive caution that was holding the company back. Will had defended my thoroughness, but I saw the writing on the wall. Morgan viewed me as his father's right hand, not his own. I had started updating my resume that night. What I hadn't expected was the abruptness of my dismissal. No warning, no transition period, not even a pretense of restructuring. Just "you're done" from a man who had been handed everything his father had built. As I drove home from the office for what I thought was the last time, I wondered if Morgan had even bothered to read my file before deciding my fate. That evening, I spread my employment agreement across my dining room table, alongside the termination notice HR had hastily printed for me. The contrast between the two documents was stark. One meticulously crafted over weeks of negotiation, the other a generic form with my name misspelled. I picked up my phone and dialed a familiar number. Dwayne Phillips answered on the other end. "Dwayne, it's Naomi Ocean." "Naomi, to what do I owe the pleasure? How are things at Wallen?" I took a deep breath. "Actually, that's why I'm calling. I was terminated today." There was a pause. "You're kidding. Will fired you?" "Not Will. Morgan. Will retired last week." Another pause, longer this time. "I see. Well, his loss is someone else's gain. As a matter of fact, before you continue," I interrupted, "I should mention I have an employment agreement with some significant termination provisions." "Do tell." I walked him through the key points of my agreement: the golden parachute, the severance, the equity options, and the trigger clause. Dwayne whistled. "That's quite a package. Does Morgan know about this?" "I'm not sure he bothered to check before showing me the door." "Well, this is interesting timing. We're looking to expand our Tulsa operations, and we could use someone with intimate knowledge of Wallen's contracts and clients." I smiled into the phone. "I thought you might say that." We talked for another hour, discussing potential roles, compensation, and how my knowledge of Dennison's operations could help Westlake gain market share. By the time we hung up, I had a verbal offer that doubled my Dennison salary, with a formal offer to follow in the morning. I sat back, staring at the documents spread before me. The termination was a shock, yes, but also an opportunity, one that would never have presented itself if Morgan had taken the time to understand the company he had inherited. My phone buzzed with a text from Diane, my assistant at Wallen. "Are you okay?" she wrote. "Everyone is in shock. Will is flying back tomorrow." I hadn't expected that. Will was supposed to be on a month-long cruise celebrating his retirement. For him to cut that short meant Morgan had likely shared the news of my departure. "I'm fine," I replied, just surprised at the timing. Morgan called an all-hands meeting to announce a new direction for the company. Said he's bringing in his own team. That explained it. Morgan wasn't just firing me, he was dismantling everything his father had built, piece by piece. "Keep me posted," I wrote back, then set my phone aside. I gathered the papers from my table and placed them neatly in a folder. Tomorrow would be interesting, but not in the way Morgan Wallen expected. He thought he was asserting control. In reality, he had just handed me the key to unlock a door I had never planned to open. I arrived at Dennison Materials just after 9 the next morning, not as an employee, but as someone with unfinished business. The receptionist did a double take when I walked through the glass doors, wearing the same professional attire I'd worn every day for 9 years. "Miss Ocean, we heard, is Will in?" I asked calmly. Her eyes widened. "Yes, he came in early. He's with Morgan in the conference room, but I don't think, thank you, Tracy." I smiled and headed toward the elevator, my heels clicking confidently against the marble floor. As the elevator doors opened to the executive floor, I could hear the shouting before I even stepped out. Will's voice, normally so controlled, echoed down the hallway. "Did you even read her agreement before firing her?" I approached the conference room slowly, noting the small crowd of executives and assistants who had gathered at a safe distance, pretending to be busy while straining to hear the confrontation. Diane spotted me first, her eyes growing as wide as Tracy's had. She hurried over. "Naomi, what are you doing here?" "I have a meeting," I said simply. "With who?" "Morgan's in there getting the lecture of a lifetime from his father. Apparently, Will cut his cruise short when he heard what happened." I nodded, unsurprised. Will had always been hands-on, and despite his official retirement, he wasn't the type to sail into the sunset while his company changed course. The conference room door flew open and Morgan stormed out, his face flushed with anger, which quickly drained to shock when he saw me standing there. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. Before I could answer, Will appeared behind him. Unlike his son, Will looked pleased to see me. "Naomi, perfect timing. Please join us." He gestured for me to enter the conference room, then turned to the gathered audience. "The rest of you, back to work." When I'm inside, the long conference table was covered with papers, including, I noticed, several copies of my employment agreement. Beside them sat Veronica Wyatt, the head of HR, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Miss Wyatt was just explaining to Morgan why your termination might be problematic, Will said, closing the door behind us. Veronica cleared her throat. As I was saying, the agreement Miss Ocean signed 3 years ago included several protections, including, I know what it includes, I interjected smoothly, 1 year of severance at my current salary, immediate vesting of all outstanding stock options, a non-compete waiver, and a clause granting me full rights to consult for any competitor I choose. I paused, making sure Morgan was looking at me before continuing, and a $250,000 early termination payout if fired without cause. Morgan's face cycled through several emotions, disbelief, then anger, then something close to panic. That can't be right, he said, grabbing one of the copies and flipping through it frantically. Page 7, paragraph 4, I offered helpfully. Will watched his son with a mixture of disappointment and resignation. I tried to teach you the importance of understanding the details before making decisions. This is exactly why. Morgan found the clause, his face growing paler as he read it. But this is legally binding. I finished for him and signed by Will and still valid. Will turned to me, his expression softening. Naomi, I want to apologize for my son's actions. Your termination is rescinded, effective immediately. Your position, your office, everything will be restored. I had anticipated this, of course. Will was nothing if not loyal to those who had served him well. But loyalty wasn't what had brought me back to Wallen Materials that morning. I appreciate the offer, I said, but I've already accepted a position elsewhere. The silence that followed my announcement was broken only by the sound of Morgan dropping the agreement onto the table. Where, Will asked, though I suspected he already knew the answer. Westlake Supplies, I replied. I start next Monday as their Director of Contract Management and Compliance. Morgan let out a sharp laugh. You can't. Your non-compete was waived upon termination without cause, I reminded him. Page 9, paragraph 2. Will sank into a chair, looking suddenly older than his 65 years. You've been planning this. No, I said honestly, but when the opportunity presented itself, I would have been foolish not to take it. They'll want our client list, our pricing structures, Morgan began, panic edging into his voice. I raised an eyebrow. All things I'm legally entitled to use, given how my employment was terminated. I turned to Will. Though I should mention that my agreement with Westlake specifically excludes using proprietary information from Wallen. Dwayne Phillips may be a competitor, but he's not without ethics. Will nodded, unsurprised. He and Dwayne had known each other for decades, rivals who respected each other's boundaries. What do you want, Naomi? The question caught me off guard. Excuse me. You could have simply taken the payout and started your new job. You didn't need to come back here. So what do you want? I considered his question carefully. What did I want? Revenge? Satisfaction? An apology from the arrogant young man who had dismissed 9 years of dedicated service in less than a minute? I want what I'm owed, I said finally, and I want to make sure the people who still work here are treated fairly. Morgan scoffed. This is a business, not a charity. Your father built this business by valuing his employees, I countered. That's why Wallen Materials has one of the lowest turnover rates in the industry. It's why your suppliers are loyal even when competitors offer lower prices. It's why clients trust Wallen to deliver even when timelines are tight. Will was watching me with a thoughtful expression. You care about this company. I gave 9 years of my life to it, I acknowledged. I'd prefer not to see that work undone in 9 days. Morgan opened his mouth to retort, but Will silenced him with a look. What are you proposing, Naomi? I pulled a folder from my bag and placed it on the table. A consulting arrangement. I'll help with the transition of my duties, advise on pending contracts, and provide insights on key client relationships. In return, I receive the compensation outlined in my termination clause, plus a consulting fee. Will picked up the folder and skimmed its contents, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. You've thought this through. It's what you hired me to do, I reminded him. He handed the folder to Morgan. Read it carefully this time. Morgan accepted the folder reluctantly, his expression sullen as he read. His eyes widened slightly at certain points, and I knew he was recognizing the strategic value of what I was offering, despite his wounded pride. This would give her access to our operations even while she works for Westlake, he objected. With strict confidentiality provisions, I pointed out, and a clear delineation of what constitutes proprietary information. Dwayne is aware of this arrangement and has approved it. Will looked impressed. You've already cleared this with Westlake? It was a condition of my acceptance, I confirmed. They get my expertise without the ethical complications. Morgan tossed the folder back onto the table. This is blackmail. No, Will corrected him. This is negotiation, something you would understand if you had taken the time to learn the business instead of assuming you could run it based on theory alone. The tension between father and son was palpable. Years of unspoken expectations and resentment suddenly laid bare as the weight of the situation settled over the room. Veronica excused herself quietly, leaving the three of us alone with the aftermath of Morgan's hasty decision. I'll need time to review this proposal, Will said, closing the folder. Of course, I replied, but I should mention that my offer to help with the transition expires at the end of the day. After that, the only communication will be through lawyers regarding my termination package. Morgan's face reddened. You're giving us an ultimatum? I'm being practical, I corrected him. My new position requires my full attention, and Westlake has already been generous in allowing this arrangement. I won't ask them to wait indefinitely. Will studied my face, searching for something, resentment, perhaps, or vindictiveness. Finding neither, he nodded slowly. You were always fair, Naomi, even when you had every reason not to be. He turned to his son. Morgan, step outside. I need a moment with Naomi. Morgan looked as though he wanted to object, but something in his father's expression stopped him. With a final glare in my direction, he left the conference room, slamming the door behind him. He has potential, Will said once we were alone, but he lacks patience and humility. He sighed, running a hand through his silver hair. I thought giving him the reins would force him to grow up. I see now that was a mistake. It's not my place to comment on your decisions regarding Morgan, I said carefully. Will smiled ruefully. That's diplomatic of you, but we both know this isn't how I wanted things to end between Wallen Materials and Naomi Ocean. I felt a twinge of nostalgia for the years I'd spent at the company, the challenges we'd overcome, the victories we'd celebrated. Business is business, I said, echoing a phrase Will himself had often used. Indeed. He picked up my consulting proposal again. I'll sign this, and I'll make sure Morgan understands the terms and the consequences of violating them. Thank you. But before you go, Will continued, I want to ask you something off the record. I nodded, curious. What would it take to bring you back? Not now, but eventually once things are settled. The question took me by surprise. Honestly, I don't know. Westlake is offering opportunities I hadn't considered before. And after what happened, trust is difficult to rebuild, Will acknowledged, but not impossible. I thought about it for a moment. Wallen would need to change the culture, the leadership approach. Your son would need to demonstrate that he values the people who make this company work, not just the bottom line. That's a tall order. You asked what it would take. I reminded him. Will laughed, a genuine sound that momentarily erased the tension of the morning. So I did. He extended his hand. No matter what happens next, it's been an honor working with you, Naomi. I shook his hand, feeling an unexpected surge of emotion. Likewise, Will. As I turned to leave, Will called after me. Naomi, one more thing. I paused at the door. Morgan will hate this, but I'm going to insist he attend your transition meetings personally. Consider it part of his education. I couldn't help but smile. That seems appropriate. Outside the conference room, Morgan was pacing, his face still flushed with anger. He stopped when he saw me. Are you satisfied? He demanded. You've completely undermined my authority on my first day. I regarded him calmly. You did that yourself when you decided to fire someone without understanding the consequences. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. This isn't over. Actually, I replied, matching his tone, it is. Your father is signing my consulting agreement, and you'll be attending in all transition meetings personally. Consider it a crash course in contract management. The shock on his face was almost worth the turmoil of the past 24 hours. The following Monday, I walked into Westlake Supply's gleaming headquarters as their new director of contract management and compliance. My office overlooked downtown Tulsa, a far cry from the windowless space I'd occupied at Wallen. Dwayne Phillips himself showed me around, introducing me to the team and outlining my responsibilities. I've been trying to get you over here for years, he said as we settled into his office for a coffee. Though I have to admit, the circumstances are surprising. Life is full of unexpected turns, I replied diplomatically. Dwayne chuckled. That's one way of putting it. The consulting arrangement with Wallen that was clever gets us your expertise while avoiding messy legal battles. It was the right thing to do, I said. We'll build that company from nothing. I respect that, even if I disagree with how his son is running things. Speaking of which, Dwayne leaned forward, his expression turning serious. The first transition meeting is tomorrow. Are you prepared for that? I nodded. I've compiled detailed handover notes for all my active projects. The goal is to ensure a smooth transition, not to create problems. And Morgan? How do you think he'll handle it? I considered the question. Poorly at first, but we'll keep him in line. Dwayne seemed satisfied with my answer. Good. The last thing we need is unnecessary drama. As I settled into my new role over the next few days, news of my departure from Denison and the circumstances surrounding it spread through Tulsa's business community. Former colleagues reached out, some to express shock, others to inquire about opportunities at Westlake. I maintained a professional stance, neither encouraging defections nor closing doors. The first transition meeting at Denison was exactly as tense as I had anticipated. Morgan sat sullen and silent while I walked his team through my handover notes, explaining the nuances of contracts they would now need to manage. Will observed from the head of the table, interjecting occasionally to ask clarifying questions. When the meeting concluded, Will pulled me aside. Thank you for doing this properly, he said quietly. It would have been easy to leave them floundering. That wouldn't help anyone, I replied, least of all the clients caught in the middle. Will nodded, a glimmer of respect in his eyes. Always the professional. Over the next 2 months, I divided my time between establishing myself at Westlake and fulfilling my consulting obligations to Wallen. The transition meetings became less tense as Morgan gradually realized the value of what I was sharing. He began asking questions, sometimes even taking notes, a far cry from the dismissive attitude he'd displayed on his first day as CEO. During our final scheduled meeting, Morgan approached me as I was gathering my materials. I underestimated you, he said, his tone measured, and I misjudged the situation. I looked up, surprised by what sounded like an apology. We all make mistakes, especially when we're new to a role. Morgan frowned slightly. That's what my father says, but it's not an excuse. No, I agreed, it's not. But acknowledging the mistake is the first step toward not repeating it. He seemed to consider this. The consulting agreement expires next week, yes? Yes. Would you consider extending it on a more limited basis, of course, just for the most complex contracts? I hadn't expected this request. I'm not sure that would be appropriate, given my position at Westlake. I've already discussed it with Dwayne Phillips, Morgan admitted. He's open to it, provided there are clear boundaries. This was news to me. I made a mental note to speak with Dwayne as soon as I returned to my office. Why me? There are other consultants with contract expertise. Morgan's expression was reluctant but honest. Because you know our business, and because I need to prove to my father that I can learn from my mistakes. I studied him, looking for signs of the arrogance that had characterized our previous interactions. Instead, I saw something new, a humility that hadn't been there before. I'll think about it, I said finally. That's all I can promise. Morgan nodded, accepting this partial victory. That's fair. As I left Wallen Materials for what might be the last time, I reflected on how differently things had turned out from what I had initially expected. I had walked away with not just financial compensation, but with my professional reputation enhanced, and surprisingly, a measure of respect from the very person who had dismissed me. At Westlake, I was thriving. My intimate knowledge of Wallen's operations had allowed me to identify opportunities for Westlake to strengthen client relationships and improve their contract structures. Dwayne was pleased with my work, and I had already been given additional responsibilities beyond my initial role. The agreement that Morgan had failed to read had changed the course of my career in ways I never could have anticipated. Sometimes I reflected, the most powerful revenge isn't about tearing someone down. It's about rising so high they have no choice but to look up at you.